Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the OIG Roundtable. Normally when we have the OIG TV tray or coffee table, it's me and Matt because Wade is busy running one of our CMS programs. But today it's Wade and I. Matt's traveling at a client. So Wade McFall, good to spend some time just with you. Wade McFall, retired assistant special agent in charge of the OIG office in LA, and now a director on one of our CMS contracts. And so we want to talk a little bit about come off the beaten path. Wade, you come from a very different background than me, a very different background than a lot of the people that work in government related stuff. And we'll call this roundtable, we'll call career enrichment, because it's not really necessarily about SIU work, but I do think it's important because I do get a lot of resumes from people, and I do get a lot of contact from people on LinkedIn who look at a profile, look at my profile and say, hey, what are some of your suggestions on what I can do to get into either investigations on the government side, SIU work, something like that. And it's a diverse question, and so it often has diverse answers. And I think what makes our conversation here different is our paths are very different. You have, some people know because I reference this, you are a military veteran. You spent time volunteering, serving this country as a Marine, then went to college, and then got hired as a civilian through Uncle Sam. I went to college and graduate school and got hired by Uncle Sam that way. So let's talk a little about that. So your path, you graduate high school, you're a wayward kid, and you've got a choice. You can either go in the military or you can go in the military, is what I'm guessing. And so you join of the branches of service. You join United States Marine Corps, and you go to the Marines. And how long do you spend in the Marine Corps?
Well, I spent 4 years in, but I did, like, out of high school, it wasn't like a only choice, because I did apply to several schools and got accepted, and was kind of just going back and forth. Am I ready to do this, or do I want to do like the military? I was a different student in high school than I was in college. Let's put it that way. So my grades weren't, I wasn't knocking it out of the park in high school. So anyways, jump ahead. So I went in the Marine Corps for 4 years, got out, went to college. Like, I guess I had 6 months or so that I worked a little bit, but started college shortly out of the Marine Corps. Took me, 4.5 years or so. And in my second to last semester, this kind of goes back to some of the talks we've had in the podcast about internships. But my second to last semester, I was in the criminal justice program. We had two different types at the school I went to. One was more of a pre-law, one was more of a police science. I was more of the pre-law. It had more law type classes. But at any rate, my second to last semester, I was in the internship program. Ended up working an internship with HHS OIG in Santa Ana. And then I had another semester before I graduated, but I was interested in becoming an agent. And I was talking to the management there, and they said, well, we decided that I would stay on as an intern, even though I wasn't getting credit for another, whatever it was, 6 months or something. And it was right at the time that the elections in '93 were coming up, and they said there's going to be a big hiring freeze. So if I was going to get hired, I had to be hired before Bill Clinton took office. Dating myself a little bit, it goes back into the early '90s, but so I got hired on. I hadn't graduated yet. I was still in my last semester. So they brought me on as a clerk, like a clerk typist, I think was the category. I didn't know anything about being a clerk, nor could I type, but it was kind of just a placeholder until I got my degree and they could convert me to an agent. So that was kind of my step into becoming an agent.
Right. And where'd you go to college undergrad?
Cal State Fullerton.
Right. So because you were already out in California from your Marine time?
Yeah, when I got out of the Marine Corps, I just decided to stay there and do my college there. So yeah.
Right. So, the thing in the internships in the government is there's two ways you get an internship. If the agency has a partnership with the school, and credits are offered. That's one way to get an internship. We're doing it for credit. Another way are these paid internships through what are now known as the pathways internships, where you were basically a version of the pathways. You get brought in as a paid intern. You're getting annual leave or PTO. You're getting paid. You're at the GS4 level, so it's not a ton of money. But that gets you into the system. It gets you some civil service status. You start to build a resume, and then it also gives the agency an opportunity to determine whether or not you're a fit for them or not to be converted over to an agent. When I was at the office in New Jersey, I ran the internship program, and we had a partnership with Rutgers University because that was our local college. We had Rutgers was kind of our feeder for interns. We typically took 1 or 2 interns a semester, and they could either do 3 or 6 credits depending upon the number of hours that they spent. No guarantee of anything other than the internship. If a position opened up, they could apply. But if we had a pathways position, they could apply. So that's one way of doing it. Now, what's interesting is when you applied and when you ultimately got hired, you actually got hired under the Outstanding Scholar Program. Because what we're talking about was whether you got hired on through the veteran's preference or the academic scholar. Now, veterans, you might have gotten extra points for veteran when they rated you, but Outstanding Scholar, for those that don't know it, is basically 5 or 6 categories that make you an outstanding scholar. A 3.5 in your overall GPA, a 3.5 in your last 60 credits, 3.5 in your major, in an academic honor society, or top 10% of your college. Those are typically your 5 or 6 options. Different agencies might have some different hiring requirements. So when you're on usajobs.gov and you're looking at those job descriptions, you should do some research. You might not think that you fit. For example, you might have an overall GPA of 3.1 or 3.2, but in your major, you might have a 3.5 or above. Some agencies are now looking at master's degrees, PhDs, and that will get you other pieces, where you get a bite at the apple for positions. The other thing I think that people always need to understand is if a position is posted at a GS, which is general schedule, it's the hiring schedule, that if the position is posted at multiple GS levels, GS 5, 7, 9, 11, 12, 13, whatever it may be, and those are for, in the ascension, those also have different requirements. You should apply under as many of those GS categories as possible, because you will be rated individually. If you apply at the GS 5, 7, and 9 level and you qualify under all 3, you'll be rated under all 3. If you're not qualified at the 9 and you're only qualified at the 5 and the 7, you'll be rated there. So you could potentially submit multiple applications. You should always look at what the hiring agency's job posting is, because they may say 1 application and 1 application only.
Yeah.
Right. But for you, so talk a little bit. So you are an outstanding scholar. You've got your 3.5 GPA, and you apply, and you get brought in as an intern. And the clerk typist is kind of that generic coding, because that's one of the lowest level positions that they'll bring you in, is that GS4 clerk typist. So you started off as so you started off in this internship program, and then you ultimately get converted, over, to an agent. So let's talk a little bit about, in the military, what was your job? What do they call it? The MOS. What did you do in the military?
MOS was 0311, so it's like rifleman. I was like a grunt, and then I was a machine gunner. So I went from being, every Marine goes in as a infantry, learns the basics and basic training. Then I became a machine gunner, M60 machine gunner. So I didn't have like one of these like a desk job. I was out. I was either hiking with a heavy pack on, or I was at the range every day. We would go to, we'd go to Nevada, up in the mountains for mountain warfare training. We'd go out to 29 Palms for desert training. So it was all just training. No, like, people go into like avionics and different, there's lots of other jobs, but I was your basic grunt.
Right. So frontline military, first in on a military operation kind of a deal. And the reason I ask that is because it was, so first of all, you went to the military first, then went to college. So you didn't go to the military as an officer. You didn't go into the military and leave the military with some very specific, you weren't military police. There wasn't some specific skill set that you had. And so it is important, I think, for people that may not have the skill set that is a maybe requisite skill set for getting a job in an SIU or as an agent. It's okay, right? Because you did your military time. The other thing that I'm amazed at is, so in today's world, when you get out of the military, there's money for people to go to college, learn a skill, a trade, college, graduate school, whatever it may be. And that's an important thing, right? People who go to the military and don't necessarily have an immediately transferable skill to the civilian world, although I will argue that people that are in the military and get out of the military have a slew of skills that a lot of people don't have: leadership skills, time management skills, and multitasking and operational skills, I would say, at the very least, notwithstanding any formal training in college. But you went during a period of time when you got out of the military where college wasn't fully paid for. And so Wade McFall had to become a working class guy to make up the difference, right? Because you didn't have that ability to be able to be dedicated full time to school and not work full time.
Yeah, when I got out, there was talk of the new GI Bill, but I was out. I I got out before that, and I wasn't like grandfathered into it or anything. So my school was not paid for, but I did get, I don't remember what it was. It was a couple $100 a month.
Right.
But I had to work and pay for my own school. So I know when the new GI Bill came out and I was hearing about it, I was like, oh, I guess I missed the boat on that one. That would have been nice to
Yeah.
have college paid for, but it
Yeah.
wasn't. So, you make,
It's funny because it just reminded me of a story of a guy that I was friendly with who had he had a college degree, MBA, was working at a pharmaceutical company in some sort of project management role, didn't like it, wanted to leave the field entirely, was an avid golfer. And there is a PGA school in Texas where you learn golf management. You want to become a golf pro, you want to run a course. It's like a 2-year college program through the PGA. And so he used his little bit left of money from his GI Bill to basically learn how to be a professional golfer, and got an associate's degree in golf management. He's actually a police officer now, so he didn't actually do it, but he got to go to school for 2 years on his GI Bill because these bills are very much unrestricted. You want to become a chef, you want to go to HVAC school, you want to learn a trade. It's an important piece of it. So, for me, I went to college, I went to graduate school, and similar to you, but I got out of graduate school, and it was the early 90s, and law enforcement jobs were pretty thin. And so my first job was working as a federal corrections officer at the U.S. Penitentiary in Allenwood, Pennsylvania, which was a brand new complex. At the time, it was the second highest security level in the country. And I did that because I wanted to get civil service status, because I did not have I had a really good GPA graduate school, but I was applying during a period of time when they weren't looking for people with masters and PhDs, where you can sometimes get in on some of the job hirings. I did not have a 3.5 undergrad. And so I needed to get into a job where I could either it was an open competitive, or someplace where I had civil service status, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons was a civil service position. So I was able to use that as my starting point. I went from there to the U.S. Probation and Parole Department, and I worked out of Eastern District of New York, and I did pre-sentence investigations, and I helped a little bit of supervision, but I was mostly a pre-sentence investigator under the guidelines, and then was able to get in with HHS under a civil service vacancy announcement. So I got hired because my status at the Bureau of Prisons, which was conditional, still existed. So a little bit of a different kind of a path there. But so I think it's important for people to know, like, getting in as a GS4 clerk typist, number one, that's just kind of the title they give you, and that's to get you in. And that these pathways internships are a great way for you to get into the system, learn about what the agency is that you're interning for does, for you to showcase your skills and to start to develop and learn skills. So a little bit now, I know you did that for a little bit and then ultimately got hired. So talk a little bit about, and I know that when you were an agent and then ultimately, moving up the ranks, you had pathways, people, you had interns. Talk a little bit about, that value, right? So you're not coming in off the street, you're not applying like everybody else. Sometimes these pathways positions really become the kind of that secret way of getting in. It's not really a secret, but kind of that backdoor way of getting in an environment where maybe they don't have the budget to pay for you to be a GS9 criminal investigator.
Yeah, and it was before we had the official pathways program at HHS when I was doing this, but so yeah, they brought me on as a GS4 clerk typist, as we discussed, and then I think literally a week or two after I graduated and had my degree, they converted me into an agent, and then I went to the academy and all that. But it's definitely, I think the way I look at it is there's a couple, I guess, benefits to having that, and that is, as you know, when there's a vacancy, there's a ton of resumes that come in, dozens, if not 100 or more resumes per job. And I think having either the pathways route, which is different from just a general, we're looking for an agent position that's open to everybody, you're going to get that many more resumes. Whereas if they announce it under a pathways position or qualification, right, then the pool, the universe of people who is applying is going to be much smaller. And I think that's one way to, when we would hire at the office I worked at out of Los Angeles or Orange County, we often looked for either interns who had worked in our office or pathways when the pathways program came along, just as another way to kind of filter through the mass pile of resumes we'd have to go through for each position. And that was one way to figure, well, this person at least was in the pathways program or the scholar program where they had at least 3.5, 3.75. It's one more like filter of this mass of resumes to narrow it down.
So let's talk about that for a minute, because the other day I had somebody that I know from New Jersey reach out to me and ask about information regarding the prospect of someone being an intern at the OIG, at Office of Investigations in New Jersey. It's someone that works in the state. And they said, one of my coworkers has a son. He's going into his senior year criminal justice, looking for an internship. How do they get an internship, for the summer at the OIG? And I was like, it's kind of a challenge to just get an internship at the OIG unless you're connected up with a school. There's credits. It's sometimes just a challenge to just bring someone on as an intern, particularly because we all had top secret clearances, and it's not like you can just bring a 20-year-old into your office. The offices are secure. There's always a background that's done. It's oftentimes a challenge. And so, what I suggested was this person had a lot of contacts at plans, SIUs. And I said, that may be the better course, because maybe a plan is willing to bring someone on as an intern. And we talk about bringing on interns in the SIU space all the time. We have some people here that we've had as interns, very limited. And even for us, bringing someone in as an intern is sometimes a challenge, because like, what do you have an intern do, in the space that sometimes is not to the level where you have to have them like fully trained, or the investment, and then they're gone in 3 months. But talk a little bit about, as we kind of run out of time here, because this is such a great topic. I mean, we could talk about this for hours, about the different paths people take and careers, college. It's not like you go get a degree in criminal justice or political science. I'm a 2-time loser. My undergraduate degree is in government and political science, and my master's is in criminal justice and sociology. Like, I'm a 2-time loser of those things. But the point is that, and a lot of the interns that I've had were people who went to Rutgers for criminal justice, but didn't want a badge and gun.
Yeah.
And so the internships in SIUs and things like that really do help. But talk a little bit about when you had interns in your office, whether they were pathways or interns, what were some of the things, 20-year-old kids, typically you've got two categories. They really are working on a resume. They're really not working on the resume. And the best intern that I ever had was, she was one of these kids who in bed at 9 o'clock at night, her roommates were all studious. She was a 4.0. Her roommates were 4.0s. Her and her boyfriend, their boyfriends, they were all 4.0 students. Like, this girl was hyper focused. And by the time she was a senior, her resume was better. She had done 3 or 4 interns. She did an internship every year. She stayed on additionally. Like, for me, she did 6 credits the first semester, stayed on the second semester for no credits just to do the internship. So for me, I think, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for someone like that. If I've got someone that I want as an intern, I'm looking for someone in their senior year, if they're a senior and they have done a few interns. I'm not asking for someone who's a barn burner. That's absurd. You're going to college, you got to have a good time. Everybody wants to do a keg stand and drink out of a beer funnel. Like, we need to get that as a level set. There's no doubt. You want to do that. But you gotta, what sets you apart from others? I think, for you, look, you spent 4 years in the military, then you went to college, and your time in the military probably taught you how to be an adult, because you weren't an adult when you were in high school, and your 4 years of college afterwards helped you become more of an adult. I look at my undergraduate GPA, wasn't great. I look at my graduate GPA, it was very good. And I remember years later, I went for a graduate certificate in healthcare administration. And I remember that when I was being vetted and I still go through the whole process. I remember the chairman of the department actually called me up and said, I have to ask you, what changed between undergraduate and graduate? What changed? And a little bit of it is focus, maturity, right? All those things. But what are the things maybe we have people here who are looking to get into the government. Maybe we have people looking to get in the SIU. What were some of those qualifications and what were some of the things that you would look at if you were bringing someone in as an intern?
Yeah, and I kind of had the same path that you did as far as the internship program that we had in my office. Like, I would go to Cal State Fullerton, where I went to school, and I'd meet with the chair of the criminal justice department who ran the internship program, and I would talk to him, like, maybe not every semester, but probably once a year. I would go and talk to him and talk to his intern class and just give them a little bit, because nobody really knew what HHS, OIG did. The only thing they knew about the feds was, are you the
Exactly.
FBI? So I would go and give them a little background on what we do, and I would meet with him separately and tell him, like, I can usually take 1 a semester, maybe later on it was 2, but I'm like trying to let him know what we're looking for. Like, there has to be a level of maturity. There has to be, the types of people we're looking for, attention to detail. It's been a while since I had that talk with him, but I would meet with him and tell him what we were looking for.
Right.
So he would only send people that he thought would work for us. And we'd interview, and, we might interview 2 or 3 interns for a certain semester and pick one of them. So it was good for him to know what we were looking for. And
Yep.
I did that for probably, I don't know, 8 years maybe. So towards the end of it, he knew what we were looking for.
Yeah. And I think,
So
and I did
that
a lot of the same things. And I would do each semester, I would go to Rutgers and do a lecture on getting into the government. I would explain what the GS scale was, USA jobs. I would talk about the dreaded KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities. And I would tell these kids, like, it's one thing when it talks about knowledge of and ability. Knowledge is not ability. Knowledge is you could have read a book and learned something, or ability is that you've done it. And I always talk about, if you're applying for a job in government, you have to be able to really understand that there is a huge difference between a knowledge and a skill. You could learn something and have knowledge of it, but have never done it before, versus a skill. But I would have the same thing. I remember doing the lecture, and there'd be a class of 30 students all doing internships, and I would do it. and it would be the second semester, senior year, all these kids graduating. And I would say, how many of you are graduating in May? And 2/3 of the class would raise their hand, and they're all criminal justice majors. And I would say, how many of you have taken one of the civil service or non-civil service police exams that were just offered? And you would get 5 or 6. And what I would want to say is, you're missing the boat. That exam is not going to be given for another 3 years. You just missed a 3-year opportunity, because now you're graduating in May and you have no job, you have nothing on the horizon, you're not on a list. If you took this exam in 3 years, you could be sitting another 3 years to get hired, or 2 years if you even do well enough on the exam. And if you do poorly on the exam and you're going to take it again, you got to wait another 3 years unless you are willing to put your stuff in a bag and go somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, for you went to the West Coast because that's where Uncle Sam sent you, and you chose to stay there for college, and it worked out for you. But some people don't have that opportunity. So give me your 3 final word. If someone is looking to get an internship, they're looking to get into the world of government or even SIU space, what do you say are the 3 skills that you either had then, have now, or wish you had, or wish you have? 3 skills, doesn't matter.
Well, I think you have to have patience. First of all, I think you part of it is getting your foot in the door, which can take a while. And once you get your foot in the door, you have to be patient, because wherever you get your foot in the door may not be where you want to stay, but you have to be careful about moving around too much. You don't want to have a new job every year, because that looks bad on your resume. But be patient, get your foot in the door, and then, figure out if that's where you want to be, or if you need to look for something else. I think tenacity, where you're going to get a lot of, just like any job search, you're going to get a lot of no's. You're going to apply at all kinds of different jobs with the government, and you'll never hear back on 90% of them. So you just have to keep going with it. And then I guess the third one would probably just be, you have to have the mindset of, once you do get in, you have to have a certain mindset of being very, we've talked about this before too, curious. You have to have that mentality of like an investigator. You have to look, attention to detail, be curious, that type of thing. You got to have that mindset like on day one when you start.
Yep. So patience and tenacity can become very hard when you're getting a lot of rejections. I joke all the time, when I was in graduate school, at one point I kept all of my rejection letters, and I took them and I taped them all up on the wall of my dorm room. When I was in graduate school, I was an RA. So, I had a room to myself, and I took my rejection letters and I taped them up on the wall. And at one point I had an entire wall, no exaggeration, I had an entire wall of rejection letters from every place that I applied to within the government that didn't require a civil service exam or like that. And then I started getting the rejection letters from all the police departments that I had applied to, because I either didn't do well on the exam, or they weren't hiring, or whatever the situation was. I had a ton of those. And then, and that was just, you have to just keep plugging away, because you don't know what they're looking for. Some of the positions, maybe they're hiring 2 people. The vacancy is for 2 people, and they're taking the first 200 resumes. And if you're not a military veteran, or you're not an outstanding scholar, you're kind of at the back end. If they really want to hire people that are at the GS9 level and you're a GS7, that could be a factor. I mean, when I went to, did I think that I wanted to be a GS6 corrections officer working midnight to 8 in a tower? Like, talk about the Maytag repairman. Like, that is it's all. And I was in the middle of central Pennsylvania, New York City kid in the middle of nowhere, where they closed the schools on the first day of hunting season, which was a foreign concept to me, but common just was a foreign concept to me. So, sometimes you have to be willing to take a couple of steps backwards to move several steps forward. I think you're a great example of that. Like, not that joining the military, we're taking steps backwards, but it's a recalibration of things. And sometimes it's a recalibration. I always joke that when I took my job at the Bureau of Prisons, I went with $1,000 in my bank account, and I left with $800. I mean, it cost me money to live to live out. I just didn't make a good living doing it. But it's kind of it's a means to an end. So tenacity and the patience are really, really important. And I think that while that's also going on, is work on some skills that make you a little bit diverse. And I was an EMT and a paramedic for 30 years. I started when I was 18 or 19 years old. When I wrote my essays for any of these jobs, I always wrote into my essays some of the skills that I have learned: patience, tenacity, calmness, like whatever it may be, troubleshooting, like it's all of these things. And so sometimes it's taking some of those, those skills, even though you were, as you call it, just a grunt Marine, over those 4 years, the mental skills that you learned of dealing with pressure, and whether you were ever in combat or not, you were always ready. It's dealing with all of the things that they put you through to be ready for when that pressure comes. You take that pressure in a lot more stride. And I think people need to think in terms of, when they're writing up their job applications, it's thinking about, how do the things you currently do apply to the things that you'd like to do? And even, great example, even people that work in retail, customer service. What is that? You're talking to people, you're interviewing people, you're de-escalating, time management. Like, you could put any spin that you want on it, but at the end of the day, it's how you're going to be able to articulate that in a conversation. And that one scenario that you had in your time that people flip over. So I think it's not so much the job that you had that you're looking to change, it's what skill sets did you develop from that job. I think you're spot on. Patience and tenacity in the search are super important. And then once you're in that role, it's the cure. It's 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? Of that theory.
Sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. And unfortunately, with the way things are in the government today, with reductions in force, rifts, layoffs, things of that sort, I think that internships and some of these positions are a little bit more of a challenge to get. And so part of that patience and tenacity is continuing to look for the job. And then the great example I always give is, pull the job description for these jobs. Even if you're not able to apply, pull that job description, look for those skills, look for those, they call them KSAs, knowledge, skills, abilities. Look for that knowledge, look for those skills, look for those abilities, and start to document the things that you're doing. What do you know about? What's your skill set? What if there's something in there that's a knowledge that you don't know anything about? Well, if you go and read a few books, do some online training, you've now developed a knowledge base that will allow you to speak first person to it and not theoretical. You can go online and take 1 million courses online now and learn about things and then write about them. And it creates a skill set of knowledge that you didn't have beforehand. So it's tough. I mean, it's tough. And, I think you got very lucky. I got very lucky. I think people that get hired in government, we're all very fortunate to get the jobs we have. And I think in today's climate, in the SIU space, there's a lot of rips and cutbacks in staffing. We're seeing it all the time. And there's a lot of great people out there, and they have a lot of great skills. And it's just trying to find that right piece of the puzzle. So I say to people, like, keep it up, right? And just be patient and be tenacious, and reach out to us with, we're here to give advice on how we got lucky, because it really is. Some of it's luck and some of it's skill. And we were both very fortunate in getting to where we were and to where we are. So you just have to be, patience and tenacity are really two of the best skills that you can have, as frustrating and depressing and annoying as it can be, and ghosting and lack of responsiveness are all real things. I think today for military people, it's a little bit easier. There's certainly we see a lot of veterans preference hiring, and that's important. And so people that do their time in the military don't think that because you were just a low-level machine gunner in the Marines, that there isn't a transferable set of skills. You've got to think about what those skill sets are and how those skill sets can be applied to other things in life that don't require pointing a machine gun and shooting people. There's a lot of other skills that come about that. And anybody who thinks that the skill set of a Marine is just going out and pointing a gun and shooting it, there's a lot more to that. So, if anybody's looking for any of that advice, reach out to us. We're here to talk about it. So it's good stuff. I think it's great to get perspectives of people that have a little bit of a different path than the traditional college job and get in. Your path is not necessarily unique, but was a good, it worked for you. Yeah, it worked for you. So good stuff. Let's keep talking about it. We'll have Matt can tell us all about how to do keg stands, how to drink beer out of a funnel, because he did go to college in the Big Easy in NOLA. So his college experience is probably a lot different than mine and yours.
For sure.
He's probably intimately familiar with various and sundry things involving shotgunning beer, funnels. And because he's not here, we could talk about these things.
That's right.
So, good stuff, Wade. Always good catching up with you, and to people that watch this, that stayed. Again, it wasn't one of our norms, but it is amazing to me how many instances I get on LinkedIn when we post a job and people say, I know I'm not qualified, but what can I do to be qualified? So, do the homework, do the research, keep being tenacious, keep being patient, and hopefully it works out for you. So we've got some great LinkedIn Lives coming up. Not to change topics too much, but we've got some great LinkedIn Lives coming up. We've got some of our newer subject matter experts that have come on board over the past month or so, that have come from some of the big name payers. We've got some really good subject matter experts. We're going to be doing some stuff. People that are keeping up with us know that we've got Dave Beachley here, recently came from Centene, was a fixture at Optum and United for a number of years. We've got him here as a director. And we've got Brent Cooley, another Optum United alumni in the data processing and operations piece. We're really bringing in subject matter experts. They're going to be doing some LinkedIn Lives. Of course, our weekly podcast you can catch on Spotify and on our YouTube channel. So we enjoy spending the time with you and hope to see you on the next OIG. It'll be a roundtable next week, I think. We'll see. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.